Okay, we're going to get started in just a moment. All right, here we go. Welcome, everybody. This is Avi Penhallow from the Proximity Portal. And today, I was not actually planning to come online, but the events have been so full that I feel that there are certain things that need to be talked about, and I know they are on lots of talk radio and things like that. But I thought I would bring my perspective on the recent events. It's hard to wrap our heads around it, that's for sure. But I guess today we'll start with the latest news. Working back sequentially, we have Trump got his Twitter account back. Sorry, I'm getting a little feedback here. Trump got his Twitter account back, or access to tweet again, which personally I don't understand why Twitter doesn't just delete his account at this point. In my view, he is a domestic terrorist at this point. And, if any of us were to incite a riot like he did the other day, which involved, multiple deaths, we would be sitting in jail right now. And clearly he was motivating that. And of course, he's going to walk back. Trump's, the way Trump operates and is pretty, is discussed ad nauseum online and in the media. But one thing I don't understand is that people don't really get the pattern that in that he will, make incendiary remarks, and in this case, inciting a riot. You can't convince me otherwise. If you look at that speech, and Giuliani is implicated in it, and as well as the other speakers that were there, and we're going to march on the Capitol. He didn't march to the Capitol. He walked himself back to the White House and watched things happen. And he could have picked up, he's glued to the TV. That's the other thing too. He's glued to the TV and saw what was in progress. He could have picked up the phone and called the National Guard. Now, we'll get to that point later. Like, why weren't they there in the first place when everybody and their mom, unless they're a Trump supporter, knows that something could have happened and was likely to happen at this event. And the fact that there was no National Guard on the steps as they were for previous events, protests in Washington by other groups. Now, you imagine if this was a Black Lives Matter gathering outside the Capitol, you can pretty much bet that the National Guard would have been there with their guns drawn. Nobody would have even gotten to those steps without being shot at. So try to convince me otherwise. Present a rational argument, though. And that, I mean, today's broadcast is going to be probably all over the place because I'm thinking about the irrationality of communication. I'm thinking of the irrationality of, oh my God, my Facebook stream is full of people who think that Antifa and other people infiltrated, like they just cannot bring themselves to admit that these were Trump supporters that were committing these acts of violence. And, we haven't seen anything like this at the Capitol since the War of 1812, but they're not going to take responsibility for it. I have people who I know personally in my life who are posting complete nonsense about vans of, Antifa, being, coming into the protest. Now, I'm 100% certain that not everybody that entered the Capitol building were Trump supporters. And I know this because I've seen firsthand reports and video footage of those who were there. But they were there, to my knowledge, every single one of them that I saw were there to document what was happening. And that was clear because some of them came on other programs that I'm not going to mention because I don't want to implicate these people if they were just there to document, but they were in fact violating the law themselves. So that's the chance they took. It's not something I would do, but for anyone to even remotely consider to even remotely suggest that these were not full-on Trump supporters, 99.9% of them, you're a goner. You're a simple goner. You're an irrational being, and you can be irrational and eccentric if you want in that way, but not when it comes to the safety and integrity of our process. And that's just the bottom line. And what makes it worse is when you have people with full knowledge. So we're going to be covering a few topics today: the irrationality of some of the arguments going on. Why wasn't the National Guard and it was just like very suspicious. And I think everyone knows this. A lot's going to go down. And then, Trump does this concession. So we're going to talk about that today. I mean, clearly this was a concession. He talked about the, transfer of power. He didn't use the word peaceful, but he said smooth transition of power. That's as close as you're going to get as, to a concession from, someone privileged like a Donald Trump, who, like I said, should be sitting in jail right now for inciting a riot. I know if I were to do the same action in any community, and then acts of violence immediately take place after you basically give the order, now's the time, let's go. He'd been building this thing up for a long time. Okay. And clearly, in my view, he has blood on his hands right now. And not only Trump, I will include the senator from Missouri, Josh Hawley, who's, clearly a ladder climbing presidential hopeful. We'll get much further into him in future shows because this is the guy to watch, you guys. Senator Josh Hawley is no spring chicken when it comes to how to manipulate and how to take advantage of a situation. He realizes he is sitting on a gold mine of over 70 million people who continue. Even after this moment, you would think you would see more Trump people come out and go, okay, all right, I can't even go that far, but they can't do it. And this is very much related to another big topic that I cover a lot, and that is those who have this quasi-religious aspect of Trumpism, sometimes not even quasi, where they follow prophets who basically say that, this is God's choice, to follow Trump, blindly. And, and this is much more prevalent than I think some of my liberal or progressive friends even realize. That's because I have this bad habit of hanging out on right-wing social media, and of course I have relatives and some people from my life that are in my Facebook feed that follow this as well, and I'm not going to stop loving people. I'm sorry, that's just not going to happen. But I think a lot of people, they filter, Trump supporters out. And I understand why. I mean, I think I should probably do it too, to a certain extent, because there's only so much of this you can see, and it's very hard not to respond to, especially when you have them posting photos. For example, one of the most recent things, posting a photo of, the guy in the horns. That's become a big thing now. And a lot of Trump supporters were saying, this is Antifa, this, when it's already been factually established that this guy with the horns, the Viking looking guy with the painted face who, violently stormed the Capitol with the other Trump supporters. And we have to just keep saying that these were Trump supporters who rioted and did something that I am firmly believe that would never have happened if they were some other group. They would have been met with bullets and much more violence. So we really need to be looking into that. And then there's a timely issue that I want to get to. That's probably the most pressing thing for today. And that is what should be done about President Trump right now. Should we just let it ride out for the 10 days, or should something more immediate be done? And I'm going to argue that something right now needs to be done, and every one of our legislators needs to be pressed to move forward to taking actions, whatever by any means necessary right now within the law, to remove this domestic terrorist from office. At this point, with the signaling, with the refusal to acknowledge, he'll talk about other groups that he deems to be violent, that he deems to be anti-American and all these kind of things, but he refuses to directly denounce groups like the Proud Boys, who clearly several, were participating in this agitation and that sort of thing. He refuses to acknowledge any responsibility whatsoever for his actions. Now, we know this already, so we don't need to waste too much time on it. But swift action needs to be taken in order to prevent certain things from happening in the future. And by this, I mean, as soon as he got his Twitter account back, so President Trump got his Twitter account suspended for good reason. And I have no love for Twitter, Facebook, or any of these things, these mediums that I use when it comes to the fact that they will not censor and remove things that are clearly fraudulent and inciting violence of that which we saw yesterday or whatever it was. It feels like one long, day this entire week. My point is this, is that as soon as he got his Twitter account back, what does he do? He tweets basically, saying that he doesn't take responsibility for it, right? That he's not going to be present at the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration on January 20th. Something that has not been, it's a long-standing tradition. And if you truly are looking for a peaceful, transition of power, and if you truly want to dispel the violence that we saw, you would be at that event. You would be a man, stand up, do the transition that you were supposed to do, like Barack Obama did, to his sorry self, last time. I'm sorry, it's just like, it's pathetic. And any Trump supporter who doesn't think that he should be there for that, no. So what this basically is walking back any of his condemnation, any condemnation that he had towards the violence that took place the other night is invalidated by his subsequent actions. His tweet, his statement ends with, "This isn't over." What is that supposed to mean? And of course, very cleverly, he and his surrogates will say, well, what he really, he didn't mean to like wink, wink at the violence. No, I'm sorry. So we have to do something about him, and we have to do it quickly. And this is going to be up to even, it largely is going to be, if you're going to invoke the 25th Amendment, it's going to be Mike Pence, who at this point, I don't understand why he would have any further loyalty to Donald Trump after being thrown under the bus just before this event. Donald Trump put Mike Pence's life in danger. He was inside of that Capitol. So tell me that, I understand you have people, like Ted Cruz, these people, none of these people have any integrity whatsoever. You have people like, Ted Cruz, who basically turns around after, telling people the truth somewhat at the beginning of what Donald Trump was. Not that we should take his word that seriously, but he even, back in the primaries, told the truth to a certain extent. And then, of course, Trump is allowed to, Trump, calls him lying Ted. Trump insults his wife. And then he turns around and you can't get your nose any stuck up further into Trump's behind, as Ted Cruz has recently. So this isn't about election integrity or anything like that, because I support any discrepancies when it comes to election integrity. And I do think, there are going to be irregularities in every election. There are going to be some things that go wrong. And, in a way though, and there's always accusations of voter fraud in every single election, from the Democrat side and from the Republican side. So that's nothing new. But to take advantage of a year in which we're dealing with a pandemic and we're dealing with all kinds of irregularities in our lives, to be opposed to something like mail-in voting and things like that is simply anti-democratic. And it was very clear. So I don't want to get into those issues because those are covered ad nauseum. But what I do want to talk about today, again, are this quasi-religious aspect of Trumpism. And it's been called a cult by a lot of different people. And as somebody who has, studied cults, somebody who has, I consider to have been in a cult at one point in my very, very younger years, I'm pretty astute at recognizing the signs. And of course, denial of reality is pretty blatant in Trumpism. They accuse the other side of that, but that's normal. So let's move from Trumpism just for a second, and let's see if we can compare the behaviors that we see in his movement and in, say, a religious cult. So, for example, I won't mention any names of individuals or churches, but when I was a young man, I was part of a charismatic, quote unquote, prophetic church, which is basically, and excuse me if you don't understand the terms, but it was non-denominational, which means essentially non-denominational means you're not connected to any sort of traditional establishment or institution. Now, you can be part of a larger organization and things like that, but it just simply means, you're not necessarily Baptist, or you're not necessarily, you're not Lutheran, you're not, Catholic, that sort of thing. Non-denominational was a term that was intended to be positive in the sense that, we are Christians. We don't believe that we should affiliate with any particular, sect in that sense. So that part, is meant to be positive, but in essence, non-denominational is sort of a denomination. I mean, whatever. That's too much to get into. But I was part of this group, and of course, generally, what you will have is one leader, one very loud, boisterous leader. Sometimes not so loud, and generally they will also have certain claims of special connections to God. Some sort of special quality that sets them apart from the congregation. This can come in the form of, say, a prophetic gift, that they believe that they are, possess gifts of the Spirit, like prophecy, gifts of healing, and there's different names for all of this. Those of you who are tuning in that know all this, you understand, like fivefold ministry, stuff like that. But the general gist of how it works is you do not question what this person says. Whoever controls the pulpit in these sort of things, or whoever controls the stage, the podium, the organization, they are speaking as if they were God themselves often. And of course, they have ways of softening this. They have things of walking things back. I've been in, this particular church that I was a part of. There were predictions that I remember this sweet old woman who had cancer, and she was progressing pretty far. It was clear that she was dying, and for some reason, this pastor got up there and declared that God told him that this woman was not going to pass. He said this publicly. He said this to her family. And I remember, even as a young man, thinking to myself, this could end very badly. What will that mean? Of course, if she passes away and this guy just declared that God told him that she's not going to. So here we get to what happens when a prophecy fails. Okay. Now, of course, in a movement, in the prophetic movement, and this is for a different video, there are all sorts of ways in dealing with failed prophecy. And there's some little fancy hoop jumping that they do, when mistakes, errors are made, and contradictions to what was predicted. One of them is to simply put this on the members of the church themselves. That's what happened in this case of the woman with cancer. Basically, your lack of faith is what made this word not come to pass. Your lack of faith. You guys didn't pray hard enough. There's failures in your life, and maybe there's even sin, in this congregation, and the devil has, infiltrated our ranks, and that is why the prophecy failed. So like there will be this type of excuse making going back. The other tactic that's used is sort of fancy walkbacks, what I call walkback. And that's when this unquestioned leader realizes they're in a bind, and they start to, but they have so much power. They have so much power over the minds of the people. And they'll remind you as a follower of them that you're not to question them at all. And they will, they talk so much that you get lost in the shuffle if you're susceptible to that. And unfortunately, in the end, they can reinterpret the event itself, or they move on to something else. And if you bring it up again, you are ostracized as if you are doing the devil's work. If you question anything, you're doing the devil's work. All right, so let's bring this back over to Trump and his cult. You have a person who cannot be questioned. You have a person that can do things that are morally objectionable by any person, by any measurement, with very loose standards. Everyone gives the statement that he made about shooting someone on, that should have been the end of it. When you're a follower of somebody going, yeah, okay, even if he was joking, right? There's an element of truth to that, and it's amazing what people will follow. Now, the other thing that they'll do, and this happens every single time, is when their leader fails, or when a prophecy fails, or when something objectionable does come up, they will immediately point fingers elsewhere in order to avoid taking account, holding the person accountable. So at this point, we now know, especially this week, that there is nothing that this person named Donald Trump can do. There is nothing that he can do that will not be justified by his followers. We've seen that. He's incited a riot. He has trampled all over any sort of decency when it comes to, observing simple civil protocols and that sort of thing. And he continues to signal the most violent, the most extreme of his groups. For example, you will never hear Donald Trump, and I'm always happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I have never heard Donald Trump say that he does not support QAnon. Now, anybody out there who believes, because when he was asked about it, he said, I don't know who QAnon is. I don't know him. How many times has Trump said he doesn't know somebody, and then photos emerge where everybody knows him, or he's like with the person, and it's clear he's not held accountable. Just like these pastors, just like these prophets, they are not held accountable to that by anyone. They are to people outside of the group, but inside of the group, that's how cult mentality works. It is a formidable wall of irrationality. And so if the voice comes from the outside, they're not even listening. If the voice emerges from the inside, they are immediately demonized and vilified. Even super Christian boy Mike Pence turned into the enemy this week. Why? Because he knows by doing anything contrary to the Constitution that he would be implicated. So basically, Trump was asking him to do something that would implicate him in these fraudulent and violent, then the violence that ensued from this rhetoric. So Pence is a smart guy, and Trump is a clever guy. I will not call him intelligent. He's clever at manipulation and certain things like that, but he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about most of the time. Okay, let's move on from that. I want to move on from that. I want to switch a little bit and talk about, let's see, what should we talk about first? Give me 1 second here. It has been a week. Yeah, let's talk about this real quick. So this is the guy I was referring to earlier, or I should say, I'm mirrored. That is the guy. And this photo was floating around the internet by Trump supporters, where they were saying that he was an Antifa member, and been at BLM rally or protests and things like that, and when in fact he was at some of these events as a counter protester. This is kind of well known at this point in the game, but not to my friends in the silo. But this person, I just want to say again, this person would never have gotten onto the Capitol steps should he have been from another group. He wouldn't have. He would have been shot with rubber bullets. He would have been gassed. And people need to say that. I mean, I see so many crazy things online of white people, especially, saying, well, not all white people are bad. Well, this is not the point. The point is, people who are white need to conceptualize, or need to stand up and say, look, this is true. This is a true discrepancy in our society. And if we want to consider ourselves to be truly democratic, truly egalitarian, we need to address it. There is you guys know this. And you know what? Deep down, even cult members know what reality is. but it is very powerful, you know. And I have to just say, you know, I am heartbroken for people that I know who can't admit the truth about what just happened this week. They can't even admit what happened this week. And that's the test, you guys. That's where you know. I want to know how many of those 70 million today would still be that 70 million tomorrow. And this is a message I have towards those on the left, to Democrats, to those who are conservatives, but not Trump supporters. What do we do with that information? If that same 70 million, even after this week, are still that 70 million, yes, we do have a problem on our hands. We got a very serious problem on our hands. And those who feed into this and have built this up, Fox News, Glenn Beck, people like Senator Josh Hawley, who needs to be called out on every single turn, at every single turn. I now live in Missouri. I'm in his state. I'm sure he's going to hate me going forward, because I am not going to let up. I will not let up on this individual who is extremely intelligent, and we'll get to him in a minute, and who has written, you know, books that, you know, I'm reading right now because I really want to understand, you know, how somebody who's so intelligent, is a constitutional lawyer, can take up the charge of this lowbrow and very, very violent seditionist acts. I mean, this is the same guy that, you know, pumped his fist at them as he was, you know, entering the Capitol building. No, he's a ladder climber, and we'll get to him later. But as for, you know, these prophetic movements, as far as I'm concerned, today's Trump concession, if that's what you want to call it, his concession and then walk back on the violence that happened, and his little wink, wink, the movement's not over. Here's what needs to happen. Okay. Now, I'm no expert. I am not a Josh Hawley when it comes to being a constitutional law expert. Lucky for him, but I'm a quick study, and I consider myself to be a pretty intelligent person myself. So there's been a lot of talk about invoking the 25th, where they can remove the president. This has to be led by Mike Pence. And some of you may say, well, there's only 10 days left. Just let him rant and rave. I've considered that option as well. Here's why I think he needs to be removed, and also probably he needs to be impeached again, because and this time I believe that there would be support from even Republican senators to support this impeachment after this week's acts. And why that would be important is it would prevent Trump from ever running for president again. It would essentially, because obviously this defeat is not enough, because he said we're just getting started. You need to pay attention to that. So if you're just trying to get to the next 10 days and have your champagne, now is not the time. Right now is the time to pressure your legislators, call your senators, call them. They need to know that we need to make sure that this man never comes close to the White House ever, ever again. That has to happen. And the only way that can happen, in my view, is number one, there are some other avenues. There could be criminal charges brought up, you know, after January 20th. And so that could be one way. If he's convicted of a felony, then he wouldn't be able to. But I mean, I think all options need to be on the table, discussed, and I know that they are right now. And so I've got my ear to the ground quite a bit on that. Okay, let me just check real quick and see if we have, and then we'll move on to talking about who I've been mentioning a few times here so far. Our friend, Senator from Missouri, Josh Hawley. I've been learning quite a bit about him lately, and so I'm going to share with you what I know. But let me just first pop over to to Facebook and make sure I didn't get any PMs. Because if you want to join me on this discussion, I'm happy to include you in the Zoom, and you'd be, of course, broadcasting live on YouTube as well. I got to put on my old man glasses and check these comments. I have my friend from St. Louis says, you've got to wonder how incredibly stupid people have to be to believe the whole QAnon BS. Whoever's behind it reminds me of L. Ron Hubbard's founding Scientology. Just making up the most insane load of crap imaginable and then watching as people fall for it. P.T. Barnum was right about suckers. And I would agree with Valerie on that. There's just, it's beyond me how anyone can still be following this stuff at this point. I really believe that Trump should be in jail right now for inciting a riot. I believe he's a conspirator, as my friend Amelia Justine, she says they're conspirators to terrorism. And I don't see how anybody could see it otherwise. And the fact that we have people still in denial about it is extremely disconcerting, to say the least. So let's talk about our friend Josh Hawley here. Who is he? Well, as far as I know, he was born and raised in Arkansas, and then became a resident of Missouri. His father was a banker. It's important for you to know this. Okay, let me just set this up. Senator Josh Hawley is looking. I'm just telling you what his intentions are. It's very clear. I mean, it's not. It doesn't take a political scientist to even tell you this. But watching his trajectory and learning about his background is going to be extremely important. And the reason we need to be strategic about our resistance to Trumpism and why I'm including this particular individual in this is they have to be watched. You don't want to be caught by surprise later on. Now, some of you who are more politically astute or follow this stuff, you already know who he is. But a lot of us are not. A lot of us sort of pay attention to things as they come through the headlines. And that is the worst thing you can do if you are truly interested in anticipating what is to come. It's like people who vote in the general election, but not in the primaries. You're basically letting all of the options be taken off the table. And of course, if you're someone like me who supported Bernie back in 2016, you would say your options are taken off the table anyway. But I'm not a believer in complete nihilism when it comes to being able to change. I think we create our agency. If we are not able to create agency, even within oppressive structures, we never would have even gotten to the civil rights movement. But we are very far from an egalitarian society. So you can take, for example, a privileged guy like Josh Hawley here. Why do I call him privileged? Well, number one, he's a white male, and as am I. And so there's an idea and there's a concept here called positionality. All of us fall within a spectrum of what opportunities are available to us more readily than, say, someone else. And so there's a lot of opposition to this. I think we could get into that in a different show. But let's just talk about Josh Hawley for a second. So his father was a banker. His mom was a teacher. So I know he understands at least people like myself who don't earn a lot of money. And he knows very well that his own mother probably couldn't run and hold the office that he has should she not be backed by, more money and that sort of thing and access. But he's very, very intelligent. I'm reading one of his books right now that he wrote on Theodore Roosevelt, one of his heroes. I think he sort of sees himself as a contemporary Teddy Roosevelt. And I have been really looking into a lot of his speeches and statements and really starting to get a feel for who this guy is. He's a professor, has taught, and he's also written religious articles. Had a religious article published in Christianity Today, which is an evangelical magazine. And I won't get into that too much because it's a theological point, but he wrote on a guy named Pelagius from, this goes back into history of theology, but, and the great irony there, and I'll be writing about this soon and putting it out, is he is criticizing Pelagius, who was declared a heretic, for being an individualist elitist, which is exactly the criteria that one needs to be, to have in order to obtain the position that Josh Hawley sits in now. And even more than that, he fits the profile of the very thing that he claims to oppose. So very early on, if you follow his career as a senator, prior to that, he worked within the government of Missouri, I think as attorney general. And then he moved more towards like Tea Party rhetoric and that sort of thing. Now, why would somebody of such, great, sharp intellect, who's a constitutional lawyer, what would cause him to move into that arena? And of course, the answer is power. He sees. Now, does he share some of those values? It's really hard to tell with someone like that, because if you read his work, you can clearly tell that he understands, he understands certain things like social construction, and he understands things of like critically, he understands at least the arguments. So for me, it's very, very cynical of him to move into a movement and try to capitalize on it. Well, he didn't just try to, he did. Now, the difference between someone like a Josh Hawley and a Donald Trump is that I respect Josh Hawley's intellect, and I respect his abilities and his skills as a thinker. And this is where I think you guys need to pay attention to this person going forward. He's priming himself for a presidential run. It's very, very clear, as lots of politicians do. But in this particular instance, his sort of posturing and grandstanding right now with the whole election fraud and everything. By the way, there wasn't a big search for election fraud in Missouri. Okay. He's a senator from my state of Missouri, but he is really poking around in other states' business, primarily because of it's an easy thing to capitalize. It's low-hanging fruit. Voter fraud is low-hanging fruit. It's a very cheap way for him to garnish more of this 70 million I was talking about before. So, Josh Hawley, you are very cheap. And this is the part that I don't have respect for him on. The fact that he is cynically manipulating people who they just don't know any better. Now, I'm not, and this is not a slight on people themselves. Like I said, many of my Democratic friends and people on the left, they're not really that astute either when it comes to like being able to, understand where they're being manipulated by propaganda and that sort of thing. So my point is this: Josh Hawley is not a working class person, but he's definitely reaching in with the cynical rhetoric to grab the vote of working class people, which is, largely one of the reasons that Trumpism is a thing. And so the reason I'm saying watch out for this guy is that number one, he's signaling his willingness to take on the leftovers of Trumpism, and he will be a formidable opponent. So we found out today yesterday that he has a new book coming out about technology. And again, these are just sort of precursors. This is not an academic. He is an academic. There's no question about that. But this what he's doing is priming himself for the presidency. I mean, look how brilliant this guy is talking about, and he is brilliant. But he's not really moving he's not using his brilliance with any integrity. He's using it to get what he wants, which is power. And I would love to have this conversation with him publicly, but he would never do it. I'm sure he would never do it. But we'll see, because I'm gonna keep after him. So the thing is, so his book publisher, Simon and Schuster, dropped him yesterday. Dropped his new book. They are not going to publish it. And what does he do? This is the part. If you really want to know about this guy and his character, this made me so mad. What does Josh Hawley do? First of all, this is the guy that right before the break-in occurred, walks past the crowd and pumps his fist at them. Yeah. Right? He knows he's about to go in there and do this little grandstanding about voter fraud, which I think is completely his right to do. I mean, Democrats object to electoral counts as well in the past. So I have no problem with that aspect of it. Do I believe he is very sincere about it? He might have some, but that's not what it's about. It's about power, and it's about posturing. Okay, we know this. He knows this. He knows we know it. He'll deny it to his grave, unless, being the good Christian that he claims to be, he decides to repent, which is what I'm calling on Josh Hawley to do. Repent from this wickedness. Realize that you've taken a Faustian bargain. You have your abilities and skills. Use those, but not in this cynical and cheap way that you've been doing it. So he pumps his fists. He goes inside. The fiasco ensues, and what does he do? First of all, a couple nights before, he posts about people coming to his home in Virginia, not in Missouri, but in Virginia, and claims that they were threatening him or threatening his family and that sort of thing, which later turned out to be denied by the local police. So that story just isn't true. Now, people did show up. I think they did some chalking on the sidewalk, and they left a copy of the Constitution, at his doorstep or something like that. It's not something that I particularly. I'm not a fan of doing things, showing up to people's private residence and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I don't agree with such tactics. I just don't. And so I would be upset too if somebody showed up, in a similar fashion. But the way that he tweeted it again was so cynical in that it lacks integrity for someone of such intellect. Using words like Antifa scumbags, that's what his tweet said. Things like that. It's just feeding into this narrative that Donald Trump has set forward. And Josh, you're far more intelligent than Donald Trump. You know better, but he does it anyway. And this is what makes him wicked. Now, so he gets in there. We know he's going to do an objection at the electoral count inside the Capitol. Then we have this big thing happen, right? You don't hear from Josh Hawley until way later, right? And I'm sure, because he's busy doing his objection, but I don't think so. And his tweet, of course, later comes out with a message on Facebook, I believe. I'll bring it up later. And he talks about, condemning the violence and that sort of thing. You have to say that, of course. And I'm sure, he probably doesn't want violence. I don't think he does. But again, it's about power, and power and violence go hand in hand. And that was clearly not something that you can walk back on after being a participant in so much incendiary rhetoric. And he bears some responsibility for what happened. I'm sorry, but he does. Now, Trump bears most of it, but here you have a willing subject who's going to parrot the phrases that lead up to the violence. So there's no escaping that, Josh. And then, shortly after, he's well the guy has a lot of talent as a writer and everything. Why is it that we haven't really heard from him? The next tweet, it's not about it's about him being dropped from his publisher. And he uses this word, and I responded to this in a tweet of my own. He called the Simon and Schuster being, weak, something to the effect about, he uses the word the mob. We just had a mob storm the Capitol in the name of Trump. And you want to talk about you getting dropped from being a book publisher because this horrific event just happened and you decide to keep up with your charade, your little grandstanding? Cynical, lacking of any integrity when it comes to being an intellectual, first of all. I mean, it's cynical. I can't think of anything else other than to say it just lacks integrity and it's not worthy. And so I'm hoping that people take swift action on two things. One, something more has to happen than Donald Trump being able to go back to Florida and continue his operations on the ground. This has to be stopped. And the only way to stop him is to hold him accountable for the crimes I believe he's committed, inciting a riot. And I'm sure there are many others. Right now, he's got some immunity going on. If Mike Pence has any integrity himself, now's the time to show it and make some, you've already been thrown out of the bus, dude. What else do you need? Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education, who I loathe as a teacher, a lobbyist, another swamp member that Trump appoints to the head of a department. She steps down. Now, why did she step down? Days before the end of the administration, there's only a couple reasons why you would step down. Number one, she's truly horrified by the events and has suddenly come to some realization, in her heart to say, oh, I can't support this anymore. And if that were the case, that's great. I still don't like you. I still will oppose your attempt to privatize, education and strip away academic integrity in the name of quote unquote religious freedom. I will still oppose you on that. But if you truly are repentant of participating in this nonsense, of this incendiary, it's not even just nonsense, it's willful irrationality endorsed by people like Josh Hawley. Well, in that case, then that's fine. But I don't believe it's that. I believe she doesn't want to participate in taking any actions against Trump. Or I heard this today earlier on another show. Perhaps she's closer to Mike Pence than she was with Trump. And that makes sense, being an evangelical Christian that he claims to be. And so with him being thrown under the bus the other day, I could see that, she might want to solidify her. I don't think Trump has a political future. I don't. But Trumpism does. And this guy is the one to watch out for, among a few others. So I'm interested in anything you guys think about this ranting and rambling that I did today. But I wanted to let you know about some things coming up. I am doing some research here, and I'm going to put out some videos specifically about Senator Josh Hawley that go through exactly what you need to know in a very concise way. I'm also putting out a new video on the prophetic movement in Donald Trump, and going more into detail to specifically who some of these big voices are. One of them was the fireman Mark Taylor, who predicted Donald Trump would get would become president back before 2016. That's the narrative around him. And what has he done subsequently? Well, these guys storming the Capitol. Let me tell you, this Mark Taylor prophet is one of them. He may not have been present in the smashing the windows and everything like that, but if you watch his podcast, Mark Taylor, just go on YouTube and look behind him. he's got his little Trump hat on and all this other kind of stuff. And he's walking back, by the way. Oh, so first of all, well, behind him, you see some books on his shelf. You see a cross, sitting there on the shelf. And right next to the cross, what do you see? A big letter Q. This is your Christian prophet selling books, working the circuit, and getting, paid to spread more of this Trumpist, cultist nonsense. So Mark Taylor predicted that Donald Trump would get a second term. Now, by anybody's criteria, then, if Donald Trump just conceded, it also means that that prophecy did not come true. Oh, but see, and this is another reason to let's just nip it, get it done, because they can go, oh, well, maybe it was 2024, return, the Empire Strikes Back sort of thing. See, the longer you leave like little options for these people, the longer they're going to exploit and use it. And it's time that we just shut these people down. And I don't mean silencing them in the sense of what they're claiming, like, oh, you're trying to silence our free speech. I mean, we need to, when people say irrational things, when they say things like that, they need to be confronted. And we can't just silently sit by while people float these things and like sneak this in and sneak that in, there was voter fraud. No, there wasn't. There wasn't. And even if there was, you're not going to make up a 7 million vote discrepancy between Biden and Trump. And I don't even like Biden. All right. So, but as a rational being, you can't make that argument. I'm sorry. But they just need to, I'll welcome any repentant Trump supporter, but I will not welcome anybody into my life who still supports things after this week, because that person is a seditionist. And you know what? You got people like Glenn Beck out there just priming and priming and priming and priming the pump for what happened. And then all of a sudden, because I tuned into his show, Glenn Beck's show, earlier yesterday and today, and they're walking everything back. Oh, this is horrible. This is, these weren't true Trump supporters. They just couldn't be. They wouldn't support. Really, dude? I mean, and this has been going on a long time. This media is very powerful, Twitter should have cut Trump off in before 2016. Same with Facebook, all of that. Let them go to Parler. Let them build their own things, because then at least you got them all in one place and you can realize, let them run their cult elsewhere. But putting little tags on things like, oh, this is a disputed statement and all that other kind of stuff, it's not about free speech. If you care about what's going on, and if this week wasn't enough for Facebook, and it's like we're all kind of slaves in a sense to using the medium. I'm using it right now, to these technology things. And to this extent, I might even agree with Senator Josh Hawley on some of the ideas that are coming out in his book. But there's got to be a better way than to just, and what's even worse is we're in the corporate entities. Fox News has been priming the pump for years for this moment and things like that. Now, I'm not going to like sit and try to make false equivalencies between networks. I think MSNBC is just as responsible, though, for the election of Donald Trump as Fox News is, because they gave nonstop coverage to him during the primaries, and other things too. They would show an empty podium of Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders has like an entire arena filled with people, and now is not the time to rehash all those old things. But I'm just saying, we need to come up with strategic resistances, and we have to do it. It's about power. We need to realize that this is about power. It's not about rational argument. Okay. If it were about rational argument, I wouldn't be so concerned. This is about intentionally distorted rhetoric, which of course is politics in general. but there is even a spectrum of decency of what we're going to accept as a society when it comes to that. All right, so I need everyone who is watching these videos, subscribe to my channel. Of course, I'm going to ask you that. I'm going to ask you to go to my Patreon page and help me to keep and deliver more content going forward, because the majority of the work that I want to do are going to be producing short videos with a lot of information in them, but they take a long time to produce. I'm a doctoral student, so I do not have a lot of resources right now. I went from a salary position to pretty much, living on what I'm given to do my studies. So I do need supporters on Patreon, and I do need you to subscribe and like all the videos and that kind of thing. And most importantly, I need your feedback. I appreciate it. I get a lot of negative feedback from some of the statements that I make about prophecy, and that's fine. That's all part of the, I'll take some thumbs down as much as the thumbs up. That's fine. But I do need you to take that action for me. At least say something in the comments, or subscribe. That will help me out a lot. I will come back on as is needed. We didn't even talk about today. We didn't even talk about where was the police? Where was the National Guard? Because that issue is a pretty big one as well. And I'm not prone to conspiracy theories, but when you see with your own eyes the lack of knowing what we knew, at least at the minimum a month ago, that there was going to be a protest and that sort of thing, like that, you're not going to secure the where the entire government is located on a day where they count the votes, when you've had all of this incendiary rhetoric going forward. If Donald Trump had any integrity, he would have ensured that there was protection at the Capitol. If Senator Josh Hawley, instead of stirring the pot with more of this stuff on voter fraud, he could do both. He could have made some suggestions. Hey, we need to make sure that this is secure, but he didn't. So to that extent, again, this guy here, we're just getting started too, as Donald Trump said in his so-called concession. We're just getting started. What the hell is that supposed to mean after what just happened? You either conceded or you didn't, right? That's just signaling, stand down or stand by. And we need to just stop it. We need to just say, you know what? You're not getting back in. And if this guy wants to try to get in, he ain't getting in either. So that's what I got to say on that. You can learn more about what I do at avipenhallow.com. That's AVIPENHOLLOW. And I am going to sign off for now.